Welcome, yes, to the September Housing Hive. So today we're going to be taking a bit of a step back and looking at digital transformation in the housing sector as a whole in terms of navigating challenges, realising the benefits. Quite often we talk about and focus on one particular segment of this in the Housing Hive, don't we, in terms of specific pieces of software or certain parts of the process. But based on, excuse me, the housing associations we worked with in the past, some are obviously a little bit more ready for the digital implementation stage than others. So I think it's worth at times just taking that step back, looking at the bigger picture to some extent and planning to act upon digital transformation as well. So hopefully what we explore today will be useful for you guys and something for you to take away. But yeah, for those of you who are new here, we'll run through some quick Prodo intros shortly, give you a bit of an overview of where we fit into the sector. The Zoom chat will be your best bet in terms of questions throughout. We do record and publish these videos, so it would be great if you wouldn't mind staying on mute for now. And if it gets to a bit of an open conversation at the end, that's absolutely fine as well. Liv, my colleague, is on today. She'll be dropping in a few links into the chat as well, so look out for those. And then, yeah, we'll go through obviously the main topic of today, the reason why you've all signed up for today's session, and cover off some Q&As towards the end as well. But yeah, just to begin with some very quick intros. My name's Jacob. I've got my words out today. I head up the new business function at Prodo. So my team's role is to essentially consult with housing associations across the country to help identify and look to solve some challenges, ultimately aligning digital solutions and consultancy to those, which are all specially designed by us to help drive digital transformation forwards across the space. Our goal as a partner is really quite simple. We look to use digital as essentially that force for good, help you to build trust with your customer base, but also create that capacity internally to essentially support every stage of the customer journey, essentially from that digital program conception at the beginning through to solution implementation with the likes of the websites, the portals, the apps, integrations which we manage. But yeah, we've been working in the space for over 20 years, over 100 housing association clients in that time, currently about 50 or so at the moment. But yeah, that's me and that's us. We have got a number of colleagues on with us today as well. I think Claire's with us. Do you want to say a quick hello, Claire? You probably recognise Claire Parks' name, everyone on the call today.
I do. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. I'm Claire and I'm Business Development Manager here at Prodo. As Jacob said, a lot of you will know me from inviting you to our monthly housing hives, which is our community for social housing professionals. And in my role, I work closely with Jacob in the business development team and nurture new projects and opportunities.
Thanks, Claire. Over to you, Liv.
Thank you very much. I'm Liv. I'm an account director here at Prodo. My role is to work with our existing clients to work on their digital transformation and their strategic roadmap planning. So great to have you along. I think, Joe, you're also on the call.
Thanks, Liv. So I'm Joe. I work with Liv in the client services team. So yeah, again, same as Liv, so work with our existing clients, helping them with their digital transformation journeys. And it's really nice to see you all on the call today.
And yeah, we also have a previous colleague on the call today as well. So Josh, you know that you're coming to the front of the surface when we come to the questions at the end. Might fire some your way. But yeah, onto today's topic. Well, firstly, actually, we, as I say, we do record and publish all of these webinars in terms of the video content. So if you need to leave today or want to share what we talk about today or any of the previous sessions we've covered, there probably is one that we've covered related to your particular position or challenge that you're facing. So feel free to head over to our video hub to have a little watch of those. But yeah, on to today's session then, really, which is obviously digital transformation as a whole. And as we tend to do, just starting off with a bit of a definition, really. So it's obviously can take many forms, really, but overarchingly, it's on this slide being that continual yet agile process of leveraging and integrating technology with the goal of fundamentally making those changes to create efficiencies, in turn enhancing the customer experience. Now, I'd say that it's worth noting that it is that continual process. There may, of course, be some cases where that large upfront effort is in place to get you to a situation where that iterative process of sort of continual improvement and adjustment can happen. But it shouldn't be something with a singular end goal in mind. It's something which kind of evolves and changes all the time, simply just due to how quickly technology advances, how organizational needs change, customer needs change as well. It needs to be that agile approach. And there's many things that kind of feed into this, isn't there? And often quite some popular and specific buzzwords around this. We use them quite often ourselves in terms of, it's channel shift, self-service, digital by default, omni-channel. All of these things are in effect just basically aspects of different segments of that customer, of that digital transformation, with the broader sort of umbrella term being change, essentially. Hopefully some of you have a copy of this book already. I have one with me right here. We can post them out, see if you fill in the form on the screen. But it was essentially a book we published in 2018, which is driven by a survey piece of over 200 respondents, over 80 housing associations, driven by that research piece. But it also includes some practical steps for digital projects as well. Now, with it being a few years old, we're in the process of writing the second iteration. Everything's changed so much sort of during and post the pandemic. So it's going to be really interesting to see the difference in stats, but also sort of the sentiments and opinions around that as well. So we will follow up in the email after this with a link to that survey. Great if you contribute to that as well. Maybe even a mention in the book if you're open to that. But the reason for mentioning it is we'll be taking some snippets from this today, with it, some of it being a little bit tweaked, with it being 4 or 5 years old. I'm obviously not going to sit here and read the book end to end, sort of Stephen Fry style, but it does go into quite some detail. We've only got 45 minutes. But it is, certain things in there are quite helpful to sort of help frame the conversation. And where we start with that is just sort of looking back at digital transformation in housing and thinking about that from prior stages of the sector, essentially. So if we look back at the 20th century housing association to begin with, and then we'll move on to digital transformation shortly, it essentially prioritized those in need and the vulnerable with a really, really strong social commitment, departmental structure, a little reluctance maybe around automation, removing possibly that human empathetic touch, and really heavily challenged by compliance or regulatory changes. And obviously some of those things are still true today. And then in sort of comparison to that, from a corporation perspective, much more driven by revenue, by financial KPIs, very process orientated, but kind of viewed technology as a smart way to not only build those efficiencies, but potentially reduce headcount as well. Whereas if we look at the 21st century agile organization, that customer service ethos really does come through. We talk a lot about designing processes and businesses around the customer these days. It is more structured around teams and projects rather than those sort of quite siloed departments, and technology is used to enhance experience as much as reducing those costs and improving efficiencies, and generally sort of committed to innovation improvement over time. And we talk a lot, don't we, about the housing sector being a little bit behind other sectors out there in terms of transformation. But I think just describing these out loud makes you think of how fast this is changing and how it's changed, particularly in this sector over the last couple of years. It's obviously driven by the drive of digital, whilst looking to enhance experience for residents. And the structure now it does feel more team and project based in terms of, we see lots of job titles around transformation, around change, project, or even program. So it is changing as time moves on, and we'll talk about how to sort of get there today. But I think it's quite interesting just to look back at these stats from what is coming up to 5 years ago, quick maths. Those stats from back then, quite interesting to recap on. So 56% at that time felt customers were ready to self-serve now. 36% said there was actually no self-service offering in place at the minute. And 45% had actually low confidence in the organization procuring and delivering the right solution for the business on time and on budget. And 58%, so over half, quite significant, felt little to no involvement in those digital objectives. But when we looked at the potential blockers
Public
around
events.
What was that, sorry?
Local.
We've got I thought someone asked a question. I'm sorry, I think it was just a bit of background noise. We asked a question as well as part of this around potential blockers to moving through planning into delivery and success off the back of that. And IT system limitations were the biggest in terms of the blockers, with budgets being quite far down there, which feels like a little bit different now. It feels definitely over the last sort of 18 months or so that the key systems in housing, which we're already familiar with, some of them maybe a lot more legacy than the others, are changing quite fast. We've got the typical IT platforms, but now we're hearing a hell of a lot around CRM implementations, the likes of Dynamics across the board, things like Salesforce as well, or Challenger software like Rubix. We've got best-in-class self-service interfaces, digitizing the application processes and making things designed around the customer, but making things more streamlined internally as well. So that's essentially digital transformation happening in practice, essentially. But as we know, some organizations are further along the journey than others. At times it's due to size, it's due to budgets, complexity, or even competing priorities with other projects on at the time. But quite a lot of that comes down to culture, which I think is something else which seems to be changing over time. We're seeing more sort of leadership roles being filled by people who've come outside of the sector and coming in, which does make a change, and we'll come on to that shortly. But in terms of what we're hearing at the moment, now these aren't necessarily blockers in comparison to what we've just talked about, but the challenges and needs that we're hearing from our clients, from people we consult with in the sector, both other partners and housing associations, and also the tenant resident groups that we run as well. Building trust is something quite large that we're talking about at the moment and hearing a lot about, which is critical, but at times it lacks, which is linked to the next point really around capacity, which we'll get onto in a second. But we hear quite often that when customers must raise those inquiries manually, and therefore must also at times check in about status manually as well, they generally have low confidence that they're being heard and that action is being taken because they don't physically see status changing. They have to get back in touch. The difference, I suppose, these days is that those people who are willing and able to engage digitally, that sort of segments of customers which are appropriate for digital transformation, they have those comparison points now with other vendors that they're used to dealing with as customers. So the difference can feel quite stark at times if it is very, very manual. But when having to provide the same piece of information every time they get in touch, they feel like they're not being heard and not being known, and therefore that trust can't really be built. That'll lead to further frustrations when repairs aren't attended to when promised or repeat visits are needed. And that domino effect that we kind of hear is that it might be the case that they're actually not at home when they've booked the repair because they're not expecting anyone to arrive on time, or subsequently, or maybe attached to that, they actually don't want to let someone into their home for a stock condition survey because that trust issue hasn't sort of been worked on. All of that kind of feeds into wasted resource, frustration, and that lack of capacity, which we kind of talk a hell of a lot about. Housing professionals are all really busy. I start every single one of my calls with, how's your week been? And everyone says, super, super busy. It's staying on top of customer support, the stock condition side of things, ongoing maintenance requests, payment and arrears, ASB, and then on top of that, all the regulatory changes and initiatives like the TSMs, all whilst the budgets are being scrutinised more than ever with the rent cap, cost of living, the supply chain costs. All of those things are kind of worsened and emphasised with that lack of a proper digital transformation programme. It's obviously easier said than done. And we'll come on to the how shortly, hopefully give you some things to take away on that. But where customers can see that they can report inquiries online, see the status updates themselves, or receive notifications via email or text or on an app, reschedule things themselves where needed, see balance updates or hear that their issues being dealt with, that trust piece really starts to come through in terms of they feel that they're being heard, feel that they are known by the provider as well, and something's actually happening with their inquiry, which, ultimately in turn delivers that capacity for internal teams to spend on those inquiries which do have more emotion attached, or for those people who can't engage digitally, which in turn, again, unlocks that reporting and demonstration of action on customer voice, the maintenance of those regulation changes, and helps you to monitor that tenant satisfaction piece, which we know is ever evolving and growing, and in terms of importance as well, or at least free up the capacity to do so. But it's not really about, how much more efficient you can be with digital. It's kind of what can you use that extra capacity to complement that service delivery with more personalization and quality, meeting customers where they need to be met and aligned to their experience with other industries, essentially. And before we get onto the how, the potential around this, we talk a lot about, don't we? There was that PwC report that came out probably, 8 years ago, which probably needs a bit of a refresh. But in terms of the data we hear from clients in terms of various reports to this, is that we're hearing quite often that 70% of customers are registered digitally, 30% plus of repairs are reported online, with a sort of similar volume coming through in terms of digital payments, which in turn has actually resulted in some cases of 18 to 20 full-time equivalent in terms of the volumes associated to those as well. So again, it's attached to, what can all of that extra capacity be used for when these people are able to self-serve and sort of that digital transformation piece comes through and those internal processes are more effective and efficient. And even going back to that CSAT point from before, customer satisfaction we've seen on average increasing as well with digital transformation being run well when compared with averages. So onto the sort of builds the background, I suppose, in terms of how things have changed, how things are changing, and also what we mean by the digital transformation and the potential benefit associated with it as well. But again, looping back into some aspects of the prior book and also some of the pieces of research we've done so far for the second one, it can feel, you know, quite overwhelming to get from point A to point B, but there are aspects of that delivery we've seen obviously work really, really well over the years and some less so. And again, that digital transformation piece can take many forms, and it's not that one-off piece of work. It's an ongoing process of iterative development, but hopefully the information to come will be helpful and give you something to take away. So again, touching back on the book, we talk about these 4 key stages essentially of mindset, planning, delivery, and measurement, and each one sort of feed into the next. That mindset piece is really critical to enable the effectiveness of the planning piece, and delivery can't really happen without the planning piece being in place. And obviously the measurement is of the finalization of delivery. So we'll come on to each of these stages individually. And again, we haven't got a hell of a lot of time in the diary today, so it might be that we run these sessions a bit of a sort of a video series coming up, digging into these in more detail, but at least we'll touch upon them today. So mindset's the first one. We talk to housing associations all the time, clients and people who we're just sort of exploring work with, I suppose, with that network growing all the time. But, you know, we'll talk about digital projects and current challenges, but why they can't happen just yet. We'll sometimes get that news on the lines of, well, we've got a new CEO in post, they're really on board with building digital around our customers, so let's get a call and let's talk about next steps. And that can really often be the change of mindset which is needed, that change of culture which enables the potential for digital transformation. It obviously needs to be set by leadership, deployed out to the rest of the business and organization, which of course can change things dramatically in terms of the uptake of that. But without that mindset being ready, essentially, the following phases can't really happen, or at least they're very hard to get off the ground in terms of that buy-in. So this is just one of the quotes from the book, and there's a few of these within here, but it is more about that culture change, with technology just being the enabler of it. So putting that technology piece first, essentially without consulting with the wider picture, which we'll come on to in a second, is it's basically a recipe to have to do it all again, because it isn't going to, the output isn't really going to match what's needed in terms of that initial mindset and the following outcomes. So it kind of begins with understanding the organizational mindset around digital. It needs to be that honest assessment of the now, looking into frustrations, gauging digital readiness of customers, but also internal teams as well with that digital capabilities assessment. More often than not, people are really open to talk about their pain points, which helps gauge the mindset to begin with in the early stage of, and also requirements capture. For us, when you think about us as a partner or as a supplier, if we're sent a brief of requirements, which is really quite detailed in terms of how the project aligns to the digital aspect of the wider corporate plan, it's got a budget attached. Here's what we heard from our stakeholders internally. Here's where our customers are. We can be pretty confident on our side that organizational mindset is there, and therefore move through into the planning stage together, essentially. But it might be a case, obviously, that you have to sort of shift that mindset to some extent. But again, it must be driven by that leadership to not only, you know, sign off on something with a roll of the eyes. It needs to be driven by, I'm really bought into. And it's more about those incentives and the nudge theory. It's that joined up approach across the entire organization between teams and departments across the board. But some of the best results we've seen is excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold at the moment. Some of the best results we've seen off the back of projects as a partner is where that mindset is in place and ready, and everyone's pulling towards together in with that common goal in mind, from the IT team liaising with the communications team to get the news out there to the housing team, and everyone's on board. And we hear the note a lot, don't we, that change is feared with stakeholders and potentially customers, but it's rarely the change itself. It's more about being disempowered or uneased by that change, and feeling like there's a lack of control or information around communications on it. But yeah, the 4 key points in that mindset step really is that those business leaders, organizational leaders, need to be sort of driving the change, being digitally connected and communicative. There can't be really any assumptions made in terms of readiness or the sort of willingness for change around digital. There will probably be a broad spectrum for customers and colleagues as well, and that can't rely on guesswork. It needs to be specific data driven and surveys to find that reality. Excuse me. But yeah, encouraging the usage of digital across the board with what's already available in terms of maybe intranets or maybe social channels, or engaging digitally in some ways, and sort of encouraging that mindset shift around, we are going to be moving you away from these spreadsheets and emails and letters and holding piles of data on your desk just sort of helps that mindset switch towards the incoming plan, essentially. But that planning phase is really quite critical in itself. And it'll probably only be successful if the organizational mindset's in the right place. So it needs to be driven from that place of openness to culture change, as we touched upon before. But when in that planning phase, you should think about the quick wins whilst plan that wider program, achieving early objectives to help show that change and benefit quickly, which does boost the team and helps everyone along the journey. I suppose if you think about if you're still sort of 3 years into the delivery and you see no benefit, it's not going to feel great. The customers are going to be in the same spot. You probably have some pressure from above. So that needs to be considered when in the planning phase, essentially. And it's probably quite simply just to know the territory of what you're working with and building upon that mindset piece from the earlier stage with impact value matrix. So just thinking about, the top left being where we need to focus first, low effort potentially, but quite high value. The bottom right being low value, but really high effort, probably things that you should only really address if you've got nothing else to do, which is probably quite rare. Low impact, low value is something maybe low priority, and the high value pieces, but high effort, the things which will go into the roadmap, but maybe later on to be delivered after the quick wins, basically, which kind of informs, that initial planning piece with how the prioritization of the requirement should be. And then it's really about these sort of 8 steps, really, which some should fall after the next, but they can be flexible in terms of the ordering of them. So to begin with, it is that sort of project team, which should be stakeholders from across the business at multiple levels. They need to be brought into the process and guided by those organizational requirements first, with their personal sort of aspect around that coming after. And that team needs to consider the mitigation of risk. So identifying the risks, grading them, who's accountable for them, description of what that risk is, what the impact might be, and how we respond to it. And a RACI chart is really helpful to sort of help plan that out, really. RACI being responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So who needs to be involved at each step, and sort of the depth of involvement there as well. And then those strategic objectives sort of aligned together with the overall sort of corporate strategy or corporate plan. Thinking about those early stage KPIs and the specifics around that, and anything which doesn't align to that plan of strategic objectives and sort of contribute to those KPIs needs to be challenged, basically, as part of the plan. With I suppose the mindset, again, going to that mindset piece, it needs to be the vision of a iterative development plan rather than this is a set of strict requirements, this is the date we need to deliver it by, and nothing can change in between. It needs to be flexible in the approach for iteration over time. And really key to that and feeding into the requirements here are customer personas. Lots of the people we work with have customer personas done probably quite a long time ago. They need to be updated to help inform key aspects of prioritization of delivery as well, and sort of the pain points and typical behavior. But you really need to understand what that current IT landscape looks like. So what systems are in place right now, which are siloed, which are integrated? Are any of them in procurement already to be replaced, or any of them in really, really long contracts, and therefore maybe we need to integrate with those and look to replace them later on if needs be? And I think quite crucially in this, we kind of come across this quite a lot in terms of, are they configured in the right way and actually being fully utilized right now? And again, this is another one which, the point of flexibility, you might be thinking that the customer staff engagement should happen before objectives, but it can work both ways. But focus on those strategic objectives first, and overlaying the customer and stakeholder needs means that both avenues of that detailed plan can be satisfied, rather than just purely those requirements and sort of shoehorning those into the wider plan. They can sort of happen together. But it is a case of exploring those pain points, challenges, what's probably working okay and quite well, and building on that, but ultimately talking about problems and not solutions with customers, with colleagues across the board, essentially. And then, yeah, it's moving into delivery. So by that stage, you should have the mindset in place, the team, the analysis of the now, and prioritize requirements as well. So going back to it, essentially, it's leading by technology and not the involvement of customers, and not the requirements that you're hearing from the people who these solutions are looking to solve is that recipe to having to start again. That planning needs to include customers. It needs to be built around them, however you see fit. We've seen clients of ours use digital surveying to reach thousands at a time in terms of scale data, but you also need to hold those deeper focus groups to get that the detail of sentiment and understand the needs at a deeper level. And then that can be reinforced with that wider data set, essentially, which takes us through into the delivery phase. I hope I don't run out of water. And then, yeah, the delivery side of things. So at this stage, primed organizational mindset, analysis of the now, informed the requirements to deliver, and the detail of delivery obviously will be driven by the purpose of the project. But I think in terms of key principles or disciplines for delivery, you need to have these regular project update meetings, depending upon the length of the program. It can be, excuse me, 12 weekly. We sometimes have weekly sessions, bi-weekly, and then that sort of project review 12 weekly across the board as well. Respecting that RACI chart throughout. So who is accountable, who needs just to be informed, who's going to be just consulted with. We need to keep front of mind that flexibility and agility. So setting that change control procedure and understanding that something will need to give if something's changed in terms of at least one of budget, time, resource, and having the contingency plan in place to, which should be identified as part of that risk assessment for setbacks, because they will probably happen. And then, yeah, going back to that point of focusing on those quick wins first, gain that sense of change and satisfaction quickly to sort of build that morale. And bring colleagues on the digital journey as well, sort of coaching the digital enablers as you go, because it's the ongoing mindset piece, essentially. But it needs to be flexible. So there are going to be some change in scope, requirements which become obsolete, and some new that come out of the process as well. I might hand over to you in a minute, Liv. Some will become obsolete, some will become a new process. Excuse me. But ignoring those things and delivering what you thought were important to begin with, but actually not anymore, or ignoring the key signals or alerts for something different, again, wastes time, wastes effort and potential benefit. Is that case of having the ability to identify them, raising and challenging where appropriate, and using the delivery methodology generally to sort of enable that to happen, basically. And then measurement is something which our owner, Pip, who also wrote the book, she says is usually the aspect which isn't focused on enough, whether it be a transformation program across the board or a particular system or piece of software. We see these things implemented and just delivered well, but just kind of left. And that's where things can halt, because you're not seeing how the needs and requirements are inevitably changing over time based upon that performance and the behavior changes too. Sorry, excuse me. But yeah, it's not the simple pass or fail. Is this project good or not? It's that continual assessment over time, which, going back to that definition from earlier, is not that end destination. Once the project itself is delivered, it must continue. And the route it takes will determine on tracking and performance, actually, which needs to be continual. So once those critical requirements are done, the proactive rollout of the backlog should follow, whilst being quite reactive to data. So blending the quantitative and qualitative data together to get those best insights, essentially. And that can be things like traffic and conversions or completed actions. It could be raised repairs, call volumes dropping, net promoter scores going up, and then blended with CSAT surveys, sentiment tracking, beta testing and feedback even around the measurement of those. So some final thoughts on this before we sort of close it is that we also asked the question in terms of what would you do differently to lots of these respondents as well, and something else that we're doing quite recently. Some of them on the screen there, people were talking about looking to be bolder rather than getting too bogged down in the risks. Obviously, it's an important piece, but I think getting those quick wins out of the way, but also the wider piece being quite transformational is important. Doing it quicker is quite an important point as well in terms of why didn't we start sooner? And we didn't involve customers enough from the beginning. And that was also attached to the wider quote there, was that revisions had to be made to customer experience due to not involving customers early enough. And another one was talking about not spending enough time being clear about the problems to be fixed, basically. Excuse me again. So to that end, if you're looking to transform behavior or change behavior, whether that be internal or customers, you need to make sure that the channels you produce or adjustments will work and work really well. So hopefully some of the things we talked about today give you some information on that journey, essentially. But it is something which we help with as a service in terms of consultancy. So if you're looking for guidance, just bounce some ideas around, or a partner to help, give us a shout, and we can talk to you about our ever evolving and growing consultancy services. We'd be happy to discuss it with you. But it's obviously a really broad topic, and there's obviously only so much time we've got today. So we've kind of breezed through some of it quite quickly from a high level, but you let us know if it was helpful. If you're open to hearing more detail on this, we could run, as I say, like a bit of a series in terms of digging into those different stages in more detail, exploring them in more depth. But yeah, is there any questions or anything you want to add, Liv or Joe?
There's no questions as of yet, but I thought I'd just kind of give some examples of kind of the process that Jake's been discussing and how we see that working with clients. So we've had we have a number, well, loads and loads of clients, but if we take a few examples where we might be planning a strategic roadmap of potentially up to like 2 to 3 years, kind of the wider planning of the business. It starts with kind of that requirements gathering from around the business. And I think it's important to have the kind of equal balance between giving every department that there is what they've asked for and actually what is going to provide most value to the customers. But also, as Jake said, kind of taking a step back and understanding what are those quick wins. So, for example, coming out of COVID, obviously there was a fear around people coming into your home. So, and the security around that. One client implemented a really, really quick thing, which basically gave the customer a code when they reported a repair, which the contractor would also have to reference when the user went into the contractor went into the home, and so that they could kind of ensure that security. Now that was a really, really small piece of work, but actually from a trust point of view for the tenant, it was really valuable. So in that matrix, we're looking at kind of low effort but high value. And I think, planning strategically that roadmap of if something's going to take a long time, are the things that we can fit in between? Do we have projects which actually require more thought and a kind of a consultancy piece behind that, so that we make sure that we do it right and our money is put into the best possible place? Obviously, with that kind of control around budgets, we need to be thinking about things that are going to give us the most value for money. So I think one thing I would say is often we see it when the client might launch a website and then they're very, very keen to kind of continue, and the same with portals, that is really good the appetite is there, and obviously we don't want to lose momentum, but also taking points strategically throughout that program to say, take a step back, look at the results of the work that we've done so far to make sure that we are kind of all going in the right track, and having those results and always going back to that measurement is really key, because otherwise we're not going to know how successful the work that we've been doing has been. So that's kind of a quick summary that I was just thinking about while Jake was talking through that in terms of how it works in practice. But I don't know, Joe, if there's anything else you want to
add. No, I think you covered that off beautifully, Liv.
Cool. Thanks for that, Liv. I would, I know I said at the start, Josh, we're going to pick on you, but I'm not picking on you really, but I thought it would be interesting if you've got anything to add, because you've come from experience in local authority, then you worked with us for a number of years in terms of managing most of the projects we deliver, but also now going to Magenta in terms of change and innovation. Have you got anything you'd add in terms of digital transformation projects and sort of change projects and how you've seen them work, and some of the things to think about from your perspective at all?
Yes, I can do. Hello again. For me, I think one of the biggest failings that I used to see with regards to projects and implementations is usually that first step of kind of planning what it is that you actually want. Making sure that you're putting in your due diligence in terms of identifying the needs of customers, the needs of colleagues, and what work is required to actually see that adoption be successful. I think if that's not been done accurately or enough attention has been paid at that phase, you'll go into a delivery where you think you're going to get a particular outcome, but then you realize that your benefits don't actually get realized because you've been very focused on this one area rather than kind of looking at it from a holistic perspective early on to identify what opportunities are actually out there and whether you're focusing on the right benefits, or you've come up with an idea of a solution or something that you think you want to begin with and assume that that's just going to fix all of the problems.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for that, Josh. That's interesting. Always an interesting take from agency side versus back to the housing side. So thank you for that. Anything further, Liv? Anything in the chat or anything like that? No.
I think the last thing that I was thinking is around kind of that mindset of kind of whether you go down a kind of agile or waterfall approach. And I know because budgets are kind of so strictly monitored now, especially with the rent cap, it's kind of taking into consideration the approach you want to take to delivery. And I kind of think there is an in between. I don't want to throw the term wagile around because I think Josh will be sick, but I think there is an in-between in that, we have to have a kind of level of flexibility when we're going through these programs because things do change. And that's sometimes a kind of concern that we get from clients is, well, we might start this and then something's going to change. Things change all the time, but the fact is we can always be reactive and kind of we can change the course of a project as we go through with the right change control management around it. And it's not about saying, I'll scrap that because this is changing. It's actually how do we evolve and kind of move forward with the technology that you have or the systems that you have. If a system is changing because of a decision that's made outside of your control or your team, well, actually, that's not the be all and end all. This is the platforms that we build are completely flexible to kind of work around that. And actually, how do we do that in the most effective way without kind of not doing it without the right considered thought? So I think that's another thing to consider as you go through these projects. It's kind of everybody needs to have that kind of sense of we can change as things change approach.
Yeah, that's a good point. That flexibility is key, isn't it?
Yeah.
But no, all good. Well, thank you for those inputs as well. Obviously, the one thing we haven't really delved into, or we kind of have touched upon aspects of this today from a high level in terms of the process end to end, but what we hear a lot of at the moment is the importance of data and how that feeds into not only the potential for streamlining processes and unlocking that personalized service delivery, but data is a topic in itself. So the next session on the end of October 26th at 11 a.m. again, we're going to have a consultant who we've worked with in the past, who is essentially data strategy expert consultant in the housing sector, join us for the next one, talk about how that trust piece we talked about before can be informed by leveraging data and being quite data driven behind that decision making and what can be done with it. Because we talk a lot in the housing sector about a hell of a lot of customer data, lots of data on the assets and the properties, stock condition and things, but bringing those things together with a strategy to use them essentially, which I think sometimes is a missing piece as well. So feel free to join us for that one. Thank you for sticking with us and my voice whilst I had to drink a pint of water and clear my throat every 2 seconds. So appreciate that. But yeah, thanks again for your time, and hopefully we will see you on the next one. So enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you soon.